Loom is one of the most underrated business tools today. It's probably one of the most important tools in our stack. Like if we could only choose one, Zoom, Loom, Slack, Threads, email, I can't work without Loom. Like I wouldn't not include it in a work stack anymore. And the other tools can be discussed or like have alternatives.
Okay, so we should talk about Loom here. Loom is something we use all the time, and we use it in many different ways. And I think there are use cases that a lot of people use, and then some things that I don't want to use the word discovered, but we've incorporated or people have started doing, and it's spread across the team. So we'll go through a bunch of line items here, some of the ways that we use it internally, and then talk through things like best practices and just some of the principles of using Loom.
Awesome. Sounds good. And I think most people are familiar with Loom, at least if they're in the levels ecosphere. But if not, Loom is a tool that we use to communicate with video while recording our screens at the same time. So it's really handy for, I'm going to go to the Loom website and see how they build themselves. The marketing landing page headline is show it, say it, send it. Record quick videos of your screen and cam, an essential tool for hybrid workplaces. We've used it in a bunch of different ways. In the earliest of use cases, we used it to document processes. And so we had some like really complex processes and order flows and things inside of our tools where you had to kind of show someone what you were doing, where in a co-located environment, if they're sitting next to you, and kind of pull them over and say, look over my shoulder, here's how you move that thing, or here's how you adjust this spreadsheet and apply this formula and filter and whatever it might be. That was use case one, and that worked really, really well for a bunch of different reasons. Some use cases that we saw were when new hires started, they could kind of pick up processes that were documented in our knowledge base and pick up on how to use them and not need to get sync time with that person to learn how to do a certain thing. And so that was kind of the start of it, and that's how we used it initially. And then over time, we started incorporating it more into our communication stack. So it went from something that was like in process, in documentation, and got more worked into our day-to-day communication where, we would present an email or present a memo and then add a Loom to walk someone through it. This is kind of the next level where you're not actually documenting a process, but you're communicating a message that you could write out and probably have written out, but you're now giving a voice overlay so that they have some context for it. And we still use this practice pretty widely today. So that's kind of bucket two that I would put in there. So bucket one is like static documentation, process, workflow, resources. Bucket two is getting into communicating a message for something that is written and static and exists in memo format or in Notion format, wherever it is. So there's that. The next use case that we've gotten into is really around communication. And this is where instead of communicating in writing, replying to an email or a thread or a message with words that are written, we record a quick Loom and send that Loom as a method of communication because you can convey so much more context, empathy, tone, emotion in really important ways. And that's kind of where it starts to get interesting and innovative beyond the more static use cases that I think most people have started to discover.
It really takes over as the need for meetings, like using it with potential hires and then, just doing things that aren't possible through written communication only.
I've got one for you here that I did yesterday with someone outside of Levels. So I got an email from an old coworker of mine. She used to work on my team at a previous company, and she asked if I would be a reference for her in a future job that she's applying for now. As I started writing the response, I just hit the Loom button, hit the shortcut that I have for it, and just started recording the Loom of the email with my little talking head in the corner, walking this person through each of the questions that they had, giving them the answers that they were looking for. It took about 6 minutes for me to walk through each one of these questions, gave everything that I had, gave context, thought through what questions they might have, and said, happy to schedule a call, but I kind of answered it here. Watch this video. If you have other questions, let me know. And so they responded back in like 10 minutes and verbatim, hi, Michael, so appreciate your thorough reply. I have not experienced a reply on Loom, but that was excellent. Answered all the questions I had, fortified my thoughts on bringing them onto the team, and then went on to a bunch of different things. But like people aren't expecting this. It's such an easy tool to use. This is super valuable and super easy for the sender, for the receiver. They can go back and reference things. They don't have to remember what I said on the call. They don't have to take the notes. There's a transcript they can search, and they have this forever, and it's locked in time. And I saved myself a full day of scheduling a meeting. The other use case that we use a lot, a fourth bucket, which is kind of this different use case of Loom. This is the Zoom to Loom. What I mean by Zoom to Loom is we have Zoom meetings, as most companies do, when we have sync meetings that are important to have, which they are. There's plenty of cases where we really need to get on the phone and talk through things, get alignment, work through disagreements. That's a normal process. And so we do that. We don't do that over Loom. We get on a sync Zoom meeting, and then we have the Zoom recording. And what we do is download the Zoom recording, upload it to Loom, and then share the Loom. And the reason we do that is because in the Loom UI, you can comment on specific areas. You can like emoji response to specific timestamps and comments. And this Zoom call that happened that was kind of like stuck in the Zoom recording UI, which is very hard to get to and only available to the person that was the host of the call, whatever it is. That Loom can now be posted as the meeting recording for everyone else to go back and reference, and for the people in that meeting to go back and reference as well. And so that's a big use case that we have on Loom. I would imagine that's actually like a meaningful percentage of our overall Zoom videos in our company. Of our Loom videos is Zoom videos. So something that we do for all new hires during their onboarding, and we've spoken about this before, how our onboarding is not just a list of tasks, but it's a list of it's a process of habit change and habit formation and process and learning. During week 3 of onboarding, people are required to only use Loom for all of their communications. And what we've found in using Loom is that there are some things that it makes sense to use Loom for, and there are some things that it doesn't make sense to use Loom for, where like a written response is actually much better, easier for the sender, for the receiver. And so don't Loom unnecessarily. But what we do during week 3 is overcorrect all the way. And we say, use Loom for literally everything. You're not allowed to write any words this week. This is a talking and video week only. And you can use audio notes or you can use Loom, but basically don't type written word. And the reason we do that is twofold. One is to get people really, really comfortable recording these videos in all sorts of situations, whether they're responding to an email, whether they're working with a partner externally, whether they're interacting on a thread. They just have so much opportunity to just get a ton of shots on goal on recording a Loom. And so it's just kind of building the habit and like making sure it's configured correctly and works well for them and it's in their workflow. The second thing is really pointing out where it does and doesn't work. It's one thing for us to say that it doesn't work in use case B, but until you've felt that and you've like realized why it's uncomfortable, you can't really internalize it. And so we intentionally experience that and put people through that experience so that they figure out the bounds for themselves and get really comfortable with knowing how and when to use the tool.
Yeah, it humanizes people. Like it really does. They're not meant to be formal. They're meant to be these casual forms of communication.
Mm-hmm. I rarely use in Loom. You have an option to share your video or your video and your screen or just your screen. When I say video, I mean camera. I very rarely use the camera only view. That's really just if I'm sending someone a specific message to say like, hey, good job on XYZ, or I wanted to follow up on this. In almost all cases, I'm doing screen and camera. And it's okay to have some sort of agenda that you're working off of or a list of items. If you're using your example of priorities, you've got your head, but you've also can point to the doc and say, I'm going to walk through these 3 priorities on this document here. And it gives people a sense of context, of placement, and it really just becomes a presentation. It's like going through a PowerPoint or a keynote presentation or slides with an agenda, and you just happen to be there as well. And so using whatever is on your screen to structure the communication is really helpful.
Sometimes recording your process can help other people to pick up little like nuggets here and there. And it's goes around. It's not like here's one person. It's like we can all learn from each other when we see each other working.
Yep, and the other piece there is that it makes handing off work much easier because other people can see what you're doing and be like, I can do that. I can take that off your plate. And so we've had that use case too of just like record yourself working and see if there's any room for optimization for someone else to take on. In a remote company, documentation is absolutely everything. So that's the core of it. But then if you need a layer on top to communicate, Loom over Zoom